So Oliver's here today. I'm here. Andy, Adam, Jordan, the entire crew. They're still
Extended
gallivanting worldwide, taking
Yeah.
some well-earned time off. So Ollie and I get to come up with our own segments. And since we spent a couple of weeks away from the game after the World Cup and celebrating the holidays, here's a segment that we like to call What Did I Miss? The premise is simple. We're going to go back and forth, and we're going to bring each other up to speed on what we may have missed over the holidays with a little bit of context as well. So let's kick things off saying, hey, Ollie, what did I miss?
Well, Gareth, what you missed was, I'll start with CF Montreal appointing a new coach in Hernan Lozada. And I think this is an interesting appointment and not the kind of appointment I maybe expected, replacing Wilfred Nancy. Firstly, it did end quite contentiously in DC for Hernan Lozada. Some comments about, how strict he was with players' fitness, weight, body fat percentage, all of these different things. I don't think that is that uncommon in world football nowadays. We've heard about it with Marcelo Bielsa and people like that, but it didn't seem to be too well received in DC. He was a bit of a disciplinarian, so there's that side of it as well. But I also think, more interestingly for me, he's a pretty big departure from Wilfred Nancy in terms of style of play. This is a Bielsa disciple. This is a coach who likes high pressing, vertical football, very high tempo. Nancy, was all about move the opposition around, very patient with the ball, hold the ball, draw them out of position. So this is going to be a real, I think, adjustment. I know the squad is changing in Montreal, so maybe it'll be an adjustment anyway. But quite an interesting, I think, direction for Montreal to go in, albeit one that does fit their philosophy, right, of trying to pick someone up who's a bit undervalued, a bit out of favor right now, and maybe find some potential that's there. So that's one where, there's a lot to do in Montreal. That's an interesting appointment, I think. Victor Wanyama coming back, obviously, is massive for them in terms of having that centerpiece to build around. But going to be a really interesting season there, I think, in Montreal. What else did I miss, Gareth?
You missed the Toronto FC rebuild continues on. Toronto FC have added a couple of really good free agent signings in Matt Hedges, a center back, and Victor Vasquez, a center back as well. But I was at their press conference on Friday before they took off to San Diego for a month of training camp. And according to their head coach and sporting director, Bob Bradley, they're still trying to get a goalkeeper. May or may not be Sean Johnson, formerly of New York City FC. It's those Raptors tickets. They do something to players where they're like, I need to sign with this club. They also like a center back, a left back, and attacking depth as well. And that shopping list probably continues on after that. There's a massive amount of work that needs to be done. And when asked about how they actually improve, according to Bob and his son Michael, the captain of the team, they basically say we need more good players. How you do that with the salary cap and some big-time financial commitments to players, that remains to be seen. But it seems like young players might be on the outside looking in. This was interesting. When asked about the future of Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy and Jaden Nelson, whether they lay with TFC, Bob Bradley was non-committal, saying we'll see how the month of January goes. There's apparent interest in both players, but I think that this shows more so that the leadership right now at that club would prefer to have experienced players come into the mix. 2 players, Ollie, they signed over the age of 30. What does that mean to the style of play for Toronto FC? Can they play a high-tempo, energetic style with an aging, experienced side? And what does that mean for young Canadian players coming through that club? Where is the pathway right now? Because this doesn't necessarily, portray a good look on the trust that this leadership has right now in the young players at this club. There were some comments made about maturity levels about the young players as well. So that remains to be seen whether the door will close in terms of opportunity for young Canadian players, or maybe they have to go somewhere else in order to proceed with their careers. Ollie, what else did I miss?
Well, just to add on CFC as well, it's also cap space if you sell one of those guys, right? Which may be something that's attracting them as well. But what else did you miss? We'll finish off the MLS teams with Vancouver. And I don't think this is a huge surprise. I think we all kind of expected it, but to see it laid out on paper, I thought was quite interesting. Vanni Sartini, in an interview with the Vancouver Province, quoted saying, it's playoffs or next year you're going to be talking to a new coach. He knows the stakes that are at play here. I think they were happy with last season, given the importance of winning a trophy, and they did that in the Canadian Championship. That was a big moment for the club. But now it is all about the league for the Vancouver Whitecaps. They've got to be back in the postseason. And one thing I'll key in on here is they've got to start well. Last season was a disaster out of the gate for them. They only won 1 of their first 8 games. They looked dreadful in that first game of the season against Columbus. it's going to be a really challenging start again for Vancouver. They got 6 of their first 8 are against playoff teams from last season. They've got to balance that with the CONCACAF Champions League as well, obviously, and we know how much chaos that can cause teams. So this is an interesting side on paper in terms of the quality they've added, and I'm sure there'll be some more additions, including an open DP spot to fill going into this offseason, but it's not going to be easy for the Whitecaps out of the gate, and we've seen how that's tripped them up in the past, so that's something to watch in the opening weeks of the season. Wheels, where would you like to take us next? What have we missed?
We missed the crowning of the Canadian women's and men's players of the year. And from the women's side, it was no surprise as me. It was my number 1 pick, Jessie Fleming, back-to-back seasons, back-to-back years, that she is the Canadian women's national team player of the year. I know that she wasn't your number 1 selection, but there was a number of players who were rightfully considered in that mix, and Fleming came away with the award. On the men's side of things, that's what caught me by surprise. Can Canada's best player actually be a shock when he's named player of the year for the 4th time in 5 years? Well, for me, it was. Alphonso Davies did come away with that award. Of course, he scored the historic goal, Canada's first goal in a FIFA World Cup, but he missed the duration of World Cup qualifying at the start of the year, and his club football up until the summer months due to the heart issue. And when he came on board, the World Cup, he was the only attacking player that played every single minute. But was he Canada's best player over 2022? I think there was an argument to be made that Eustachio, Johnston, and Jonathan David could have all been considered in that mix. I think that this may have been a year where reputation and scoring that historic goal may have been enough to push him over the top, but certainly it was one that raised eyebrows. Finally, Ollie, what else did I miss?
Well, this is a nice one to finish on, I think, because we've seen the 2 big off-season signings in terms of the Canadian men's national team going to Europe, Alistair Johnston and Ismail Kone. And they're fitting in like they've been there for years. It's early days, obviously, particularly with Kone. He's just played the 1 FA Cup game. But both players really impressive. Johnston stepping into the old firm, Celtic against Rangers, one of the most intense, high-pressure matches you can play in as a professional footballer. Takes it all in his stride, no problem, and keeps his place in the team for the following league game as well. He looks like, and I don't think it should be a surprise that Alistair Johnston will be able to cope quite comfortably with the level in the Scottish Premiership, coming from MLS, coming off a World Cup. But then Kone as well. What impressed me most about Kone was not just the performance, but the interview he gave afterwards, where he's talking about, I wanted to try and help the young players that Watford put in the team that day, show them a bit of leadership, show them the ropes, talking like he was a 30-year-old veteran and not making his debut as a young player who's still pretty new to professional football. So that's been good to see, showing that I think, that the way we rated those 2 players as players who should be comfortable in European football looks like it's going to be borne out by their performances so far.
2 more Canadian men's national team players to follow their trials and tribulations playing overseas. Shout out to Jonathan David, scored in back-to-back games. You can watch all of Jonathan David's Lille games right here on OneSoccer. Could be a big summer ahead. I think you should wait for a move. The market will be plumb for the summer. Also, Ollie, just a reminder, Manchester United now in the top 4. So no need to slag them. 7 wins in a row. It's a win being back with Oliver Platt and all of you. OneSoccer Today is back. Next show coming up this week on Thursday. On behalf of Oliver and everyone here at OneSoccer, I'm Wheels. Thanks for joining us on OneSoccer Today.